So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Arizona tax credits today. We're doing a little one-on-one session, and some of you may have attended last year. This is going to be pretty similar, but hopefully it's a good refresher for you. So let's see here. So a little bit about the basics. What are the Arizona tax credits? It is when a taxpayer makes a cash contribution to a qualified organization, and they can receive a dollar for dollar tax credit on their personal income tax returns for the state of Arizona. So if you make one of these qualified donations, like a donation that qualifies for the credit, you end up paying the same amount of like cash outflow as you would related to your Arizona tax return as if you didn't make the credit, but you essentially are able to direct how you want your tax liability, what you want it to be used towards. So if you have organizations like charitable organizations or schools that you like to support, it's a great way to give them some money, and you're really not out any more than you would have been if you had just forgot, like didn't do the tax credits at all. So there are four main credit types. There's the Qualified Charitable Organization, or the QCO, the Qualified Foster Care Organization, or QCFO, private school tuition organizations, and public schools. And Child and Family Resources is a Qualified Charitable Organization, or QCO. So how does it work? You or your friends and family, as whoever the taxpayer is, they make a cash donation to an eligible organization, and cash can also be via like check and credit card. Taxpayer claims the credit on the Arizona personal income tax returns up to the annual limit for the credit. There are different limits if you're filing single versus married. That we'll go over in the next slide. And then the taxpayer's Arizona income tax liability is reduced dollar for dollar by the credit amount. So each credit has its own limitations. The 2023 limits are as followed. If you donate to a qualified charitable organization, it's $421 if you file single, $841 if you file married filing joint. For the foster care organizations, it's $526 if you're single, $1,051 if it's married filing joint. Private school tuition organizations is $1,307 if you're single, $2,609 if you're married filing joint. And then the public schools are $200 single or $400 married filing joint. They're kind of like random numbers now because they've been getting adjusted for inflation. So like for 2022, the limit was for the QCO was 400 single and 800 married filing joint, which was like easier to remember. But because inflation was so crazy, they've adjusted them upwards a little bit. I don't know why the poor public school credit didn't get adjusted. So it's been stuck at the 200 or 400 level. So if you want to contribute, the maximum amount that you can do to utilize the credits, if you're single, so for 2023, is $2,454 if you were to max out all four. And if you're married filing joint, it's $4,901. And the 2024 limits are already up on Arizona's website, but I'm going over the 23 limits just because we haven't filed the 23 returns yet. And if you file married filing separate or head of household, the limit you're under that's applicable to you is the single limit. And the credit cannot reduce your liability below zero. So if you donate and you're within the overall like credit limitation, but your liability, you've wiped it out to zero, you will have a carry forward that can be used for up to 5 years. So like a quick example of how this could make an impact, what I've done in my past was I had a friend who used to be an art teacher at, a public elementary school. I would donate $400 when I was married, or 200 after I got divorced. And I would earmark it to the art program at her school. and she would get that money, allocated to her and actually be able to use that money, specifically in her class. So it really is a great way to, if you have organizations that you want to support and they qualify for the credit, to make an impact. So how do these get reported on your tax returns? There is a tax form related to each one, and I have them listed here. And you're going to need some information in order to properly fill out the form. So most of this stuff in item 2 on the slide is going to be found on the donation acknowledgement letter or receipt that you get from the organization after you donate. So the things that you'll need are the organization's name, the donation amount, the date. For most of the credits, there's some type of code, like a charity code or a school district code that you'll need to include. And then for the private school organizations, it's you also have to include the address. So the organizations that qualify for these things, they're pretty good at making sure all of that information is included on the letters that they give you. And if you prepare your returns yourself, make sure you've got the letter in hand after you donate, or if you have a CPA, then make sure you give that letter to your CPA. And so you have the separate tax forms for each credit specifically, and then those totals flow into Form 301, which kind of lists all of the applicable credits for Arizona, and you come up with a total that will then flow to your regular Arizona Form 140. Some additional considerations and tips and tricks before we get into the examples. So you can make donations either during the normal calendar year or between January 1st and tax day, which is usually 4/15 of the following year, and have that count as a prior year donation. So for the 2023 tax year, you can make a donation, if you haven't already, between now and 12/31, or you can donate between January 1st and April 15th, which is April 15th, 2024, which is tax day 2024. And it can count as either a 2023 donation or a 2024 donation if you're in that January through April 15th timeframe. A lot of organizations have a page dedicated on their website towards the AZ tax credits. And I've often found, especially if you contribute online, that you can check a box for which year you want it to be applicable to, like if you wanted it to be for 2023 or 2024. Just make sure if you do a donation like in 2024 that's supposed to count towards 2023, that you don't end up double counting it and try to deduct it again when you're doing your 2024 tax returns. That's why it is helpful. The forms include the dates and everything. So it kind of helps to make sure that you don't accidentally deduct it the same thing 2 years in a row. Non-cash donations, so things like you drop off a box of clothes or household items, those are not eligible for the credit. Only like cash or cash equivalent donations. So if you do give non-cash donations to an organization that qualifies for the credit, it's just going to be treated like a regular non-cash donation on your federal or state return as an itemized deduction if you itemize rather than taking the standard deduction. Let's see. This is just like my CPA warning the taxpayers that even if you do pay somebody to do your tax return, it's your responsibility to make sure you have all of the records. And Arizona has been kind of trying to button up compliance for these types of donations, because it used to be a little bit easier to just pretend like you made a donation and you actually didn't. So that's why we now have to kind of include all of this information, the date, the amount, the organization, so they can track it. So regardless of if anytime you make a charitable donation, if it's over $250, you're supposed to have a letter that you keep in your hand by the time your return is filed. If you don't have that letter and your return is ever audited, then the IRS is going to disallow the donation. And I have some clients that make, the credit donations of less than $250, but I still ask them for the letter just because, I need to fill out all the proper information for the tax form. And let's see, sometimes you'll get, like, you do an online donation and you'll get an immediate email confirmation of the donation that you made. Sometimes those emails will include all of the information you need, like the code and all of that stuff. Sometimes they don't. And so then sometimes you'll get a letter in the mail that's like the official letter afterwards. So I would keep both things, honestly, just for your records. Let's see, the classification of the organizations and like what organizations qualify for what type of credit do change from time to time. So you have to check the list on the Arizona website, and I do have the links included later in the presentation. Check the list for like whatever physical year we are in when you make the donation. So if you make the donation in 2023, check the 23 list. If you make the donation in 2024, even if it's going to count as a 2023 donation, check the 2024 list to make sure that the organization qualifies and is on that list. Example that I always use of when this didn't work out well for a lot of people was a handful of years ago. Casa de los Niños qualified for the foster care organization credit. And there was one year that it like flipped and they didn't qualify for the foster care credit, but they did for the QCO qualified charitable organization credit. So you might think, well, that's not a big deal. But for a lot of clients, they kind of pick out the organizations that they like to donate to in each category. And, if you make enough money and you have a big enough tax liability, you could max it out. So I had some clients that maxed out the credits. They already had donated the maximum amount to the QCO, and they thought that their CASA donation was for the foster care bucket. And so essentially they didn't end up getting a credit. They would have to have donated another, 500 or $1,000 to someone on the list for that year for the foster care credit. And their CASA donation ended up being just a regular cash contribution for itemized deductions. So that's just something to double check each year. Don't just assume the same organization is going to qualify, especially for the QCO and the QCFO buckets. Let's see. The credits are not refundable, which means they will reduce your liability to zero, but you're not going to get a refund just because you made a credit donation. You would only get a refund if you had additional like estimated tax payments or like withholding on your W-2s. And we'll kind of see that in action in one of the examples in a second. The donations that exceed the annual limit are treated like regular cash contributions on your itemized deductions if you itemize. So a lot of people don't itemize anymore since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act put some restrictions on itemized deductions. It took away some things, but a lot of people don't itemize for federal, but they do for Arizona. And Arizona does have a like above the line deduction for charitable that you can get kind of a partial charitable deduction, even if you don't itemize for Arizona. So if you donated $5,000 to Child and Family Resources, well, that's way more than the credit amount. So you would max out at that, 421 or an 841 amount for the credit. And then the remainder would just be a regular cash contribution for itemized deduction purposes. And I have some clients who they like to hold off on making donations each year until they know, until their tax returns are prepared, just say in February or March, and they know the exact amount that they need to donate to get to zero. So you could have like no withholding on your W-2 or no estimated tax payments paid in, you're zero paid into the state. Your return is prepared. When it's done, just say March 15th it's done and you owe $505 to Arizona. As long as you're before the 4/15, 24 cutoff, you could then go pick out your organizations and donate exactly $505, and then you get back to zero. Or just say your return's prepared and you did have withholding, but you end up owing $200. Then if you hadn't already maxed out your credit donations previously, then you could go and make up for that difference, the $200 difference. That way, as long as you're before the 4/15 cutoff. So if your returns are extended, you don't get until 10/15, 24 to have it count towards 2023. You have to make the credit donations by the 4/15 deadline. So now I have a couple of examples. The first one is a married couple donates $800 to Child and Family Resources, which is, I mentioned before, a QCO, on 12/31/2022. Their 2022 income tax liability for Arizona before the credit is $1,100, and they have $900 of Arizona withholding from their W-2s. So you look over on the right, the calculation, you take their $1,100 liability, you subtract out the $800 credit, and their adjusted liability is $300 after that. They had $900 in withholding, so they're going to get a $600 refund, which is great, but that's because they already had withholding paid in. If they had no withholding, you would have gotten to the $300 adjusted liability after the credit, and they would need to pay that $300, either mailing a check, paying online, or they could, if they hadn't already maxed out, and they wouldn't have maxed out all of the buckets yet, so they could go and see if they want to make another $300 donation to an eligible organization. And then this is how it looks on the form. I'm using 2022 just because the 2023 forms aren't out yet, but they're going to look, I imagine that they're going to look very similar for 2023. So you can see we're on the AZ form 321, which is for the QCO, qualified charitable organizations. In the Part 1A is where you've got the contributions made during the normal tax year. So we've got the date we made the contribution, the specific code, and then for Child and Family Resources, the name and the amount. And then we've got a second example. So now you have a single person who donates $400 to Child and Family Resources on 4/15/2023 towards the 2022 tax year. This person's 2022 Arizona income tax liability before the credit is only $250, and they haven't had any withholding or estimated tax payments. So you're going to have their $250 liability before the credit. You're going to be able to subtract or utilize the credit up to the tax liability. So you use up $250 for the credit, you get to a net zero. So you don't owe anything, but you don't get a refund of $150. Rather, you have a $150 carryover that you can use for the 2023 year. And the carryovers can be utilized for up to a 5-year period of time. So you're still going to get to benefit from it, but you just don't get a refund related to that. And I think, okay, we've got the same form as the last example, except for you can see since the donation was made in 2023 for the 2022 year, it's now in the lower section in Part 1, the B section. It has all of the same information, but it is easier. Like if you're like, oh, if you prepare your own return and you're like, we're now in the 2024 tax return preparation, and you're like, oh, did I already use this donation? You can go and look back on this form and see, oh, yep, I already did. So if I need to make another one, if I want to utilize it again this year. And I've got some what I think are helpful links here. But there's a link to the main credit page, and let me try to click it and see so you guys can see what it looks like. I just need to move it. Can you see it okay, Chelsea? Cool. So this is a really helpful page, and you can get here very quickly if you just Google Arizona tax credits, you can find it. It's from the Arizona Department of Revenue website, and they have a ton of information about each of the buckets. So if I want to look into making a contribution to a QCO or QCFO, I can click in here. They tell you a little bit about it. They already have the 2023 and the 2024 thresholds or like credit limitations listed, and then they have the lists. So they don't have the 2024 list up yet, but they should soon. But right now, if you wanted to look and see, okay, what type of organizations are on here, there's 21 pages of organizations. So there's a lot of different options. I feel like there's an organization for everyone depending on your interests. And then here's the foster care one, is long, only 2 pages. But essentially only 1 page. So a little less choices. And then you go back, you can also get to the list of the public schools. Might be a little hard to see, but you can see the list. So you can like double check that if there's a school you're thinking of is on here. And then what I do is I usually then go to that school's website to make the donation. And then you've got similar with the credit for the related to the private schools. So then they've got the list here. And it gives you the website for most of them, for this one, not for the other ones. That's a little annoying. But so this is the main website. And then what I've got in the link to each one that I just clicked at here. So it'll be a little easier for you to find. And then there's another credit that's not kind of part of the main group because it has different qualifications, but if you're really into supporting the military and like Arizona military families, there is a credit available. It's up to $200 single, $400 married filing joint. I've got the link to their website here. Donations are limited to $1 million in total a year. Historically, the cap has been reached in the fall each year, but when I just clicked this, I updated it very recently, but they were only at about 500,000 as of August 15th-ish. So there's probably still an amount that you can donate. You would just go through their website. And then of course I've got Family Resources, a link to, you guys have a tax credit specific page on your website with some FAQs. I did want to tell you, Chelsea, the lists need to be updated to 2023. I just realized that today. But so you'll find similar pages for a lot of the organizations that have try to make it really easy for you to be able to do the donation. And I'm sorry if you can hear like they're doing construction beneath me in my apartment. So hopefully you guys can hear it. But I think that was it. Are there any questions? Chelsea, do you see any in the Q&A?
No questions as of right now. We do have a Q&A section. If you do have a question that you'd like to type in, please feel free to do so now. I know Lindsay would be happy to help us.
Yeah, and you've got my info on the screen here, and if you don't have time to write it down and you think of something later on, just feel free. I'm sure Chelsea can forward out my information. So just another option. You can get really into it. I have some clients who get into it and some clients who've never donated. It's just sort of, what's your preference? Just another way to direct where you want your tax payment to go. So
thank you guys so much for
that's
taking the time to join us today. And thank you, Lindsay, for taking the time to share this information with everybody.